Future wife, before I say anything else tonight, I need you to promise me one thing. Don't reach for my hand yet. Don't tell me it's going to be fine. Don't rush in to comfort me before I've finished. Just let me talk, even when the words come out clumsy. Even when I circle back to the same sentence 3 times because I still haven't found the right way to say it. I've rehearsed this in my head for weeks, in the shower, in the car, lying awake next to the version of you that only exists in my imagination. And every single time, I chickened out before I reached the real part. Tonight I'm not chickening out. I am nervous to marry you. I need to say that plainly, without dressing it up, because I've spent so long dressing things up that I'm not sure I remember what plain honesty even sounds like anymore. I'm not nervous because I don't love you. I'm not nervous because some part of me is looking for a door-marked exit. I'm nervous because loving you all the way marriage asks a person to love, means I don't get to keep any spare rooms in my heart locked. Every closet gets opened. Every drawer gets emptied out onto the floor in front of you. And some of what's in those drawers I've never shown anyone, not because it's shameful, but because showing it means admitting it's real. People talk about marriage like it's a single decision made once, standing at an altar in good light with good music playing. I used to think that too. Now I think marriage is less like a decision and more like a demolition, a slow, patient demolition of every wall I built to keep myself from getting hurt. And I built a lot of walls. I built them so early and so quietly that for years I didn't even know they were walls. I thought they were just who I was. Steady, self-sufficient, unbothered. The guy who didn't need much from anyone. You didn't tear those walls down, future wife. That's important for you to know. You didn't storm in with some grand gesture and knock them over. You did something much stranger and much more disarming. You made me forget why I built them in the first place. One ordinary Tuesday I looked up and realized the walls were still standing, but I didn't feel like I needed them anymore. And that terrified me more than losing everything I own ever could, because at least loss I understand. Loss has a shape. Loss you can prepare for. This was different. This was standing in an open field with nothing around me for protection, and somehow feeling more exposed than I've ever felt in my life. Can I tell you something I've never told anyone? There are nights, more of them than I'd like to admit, where I lie next to you after you've fallen asleep and I just watch you breathe. Not in some poetic, movie scene way, in a scared way. I watch you breathe and I think, this is the most important thing in my life right now. This exact moment, this exact person, and I have absolutely no way to guarantee I get to keep it. Nobody warns you about that part. Nobody tells you that loving someone completely means signing up for a fear that never fully goes away. A fear that just becomes part of the furniture of your life. Something you learn to live around instead of something you ever get rid of. Future wife. I think about the difference between finding the right person and becoming the right person a lot. Everyone obsesses over the first part. Is she the one? Is he the one? Do we have chemistry? Do our 5-year plans line up? Nobody talks about the second part nearly enough. Becoming someone capable of loving another person for 40, 50 years. That's not romantic, that's not a Pinterest board. That's work. Unglamorous and repetitive and sometimes boring work. Done mostly in private, mostly on days nobody's watching. I used to think I was already that person. I thought loving you would just be an extension of who I already was. I was wrong, and figuring out how wrong I was has been the most humbling stretch of my entire adult life. I spent years, future wife, being proud of how little I needed. I could move to a new city alone and be fine within a week. I could go through a hard season and never once pick up the phone to ask for help. I told myself that was strength. I told myself the people who needed constant reassurance, constant connection, constant checking in, were somehow weaker than me, more fragile. What a stupid, lonely thing to believe. What a convenient lie to tell myself so I never had to risk needing anybody and then losing them. Because if you never let yourself need someone, they can never really take anything from you when they go. That was the whole architecture of how I protected myself. Stay useful, stay capable. Never let the foundation of your happiness rest on someone who could leave. Then you showed up, and you didn't ask me to change any of that. That's the part that undid me. You just kept loving the parts of me that didn't perform for you. The tired parts, the quiet parts, the parts that didn't have anything impressive to say. And somewhere in there, without my permission, I started needing you. Not wanting, needing. There's a difference, and I resisted it for longer than I should admit, because needing someone felt like handing them a key to a room I'd never let anyone into. A room where all my worst fears about myself were kept. Future wife, if you could climb inside my head for just one day, would you still choose to marry me? I ask myself that more than you'd think. Not because I believe I'm hiding something monstrous. There's no secret betrayal in there. No other woman, no version of this where I'm not fully completely yours. What's in there is smaller and somehow harder to admit. It's doubt. Plain, boring, everyday doubt. The kind that whispers, what if you're not actually as steady as she thinks you are? What if one day the version of you that shows up tired and irritable and unsure of himself becomes the only version she sees, and she realizes she signed up for less than she thought she was getting? I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like I don't trust you, or worse, like I don't trust myself. Maybe both are a little true. But I think what's actually happening is simpler than that. I think I'm finally old enough and finally in love enough to understand that real strength was never about hiding the shaking. Real strength is letting someone watch your hands tremble and trusting they won't use it against you, won't quietly file it away as evidence that they made a mistake. That kind of trust doesn't come naturally to me. I'm having to learn it the way you learn a language as an adult, slowly, with an accent, making embarrassing mistakes along the way. I think that's really what scares me about marriage. Not the ceremony, not the paperwork, not even the promise of forever, though forever is a big dizzying word if you actually stop and look at it. What scares me is that marriage removes the last of my hiding places. Right now I can still retreat a little. I can have a bad week and keep some of it to myself. I can have a doubt and swallow it instead of voicing it. Once we're married, once we've said the words in front of everyone we love, I don't think I get to do that anymore. Not if I want the marriage to actually mean something. Forever, I think, is really just another word for I'm done hiding from you. Even the parts of me that are still under construction, especially those parts, future wife, some nights I let myself imagine us decades from now. Not the wedding, not the honeymoon. I skip all of that in my imagination and go straight to something much quieter. Us in a kitchen we've lived in for 20 years, the paint a little worn in the spots we touch most, coffee going cold on the counter because we got distracted mid-sentence talking about something that happened 30 years earlier that still makes us laugh the exact same way. Your hand finding mine without either of us thinking about it, the way people reach for a light switch in a house they know in the dark. When I picture that, something in my chest goes completely still in the best possible way. That's peace. Not the peace of having nothing to worry about. The peace of knowing exactly who's going to be sitting across from me when the worrying starts. And then, almost immediately, another thought slides in behind it, quieter but somehow louder at the same time. What if I'm the reason that future doesn't happen the way I picture it? What if there's a version of me, 10 years from now, worn down by something I can't predict tonight, who doesn't know how to protect what we've built? What if forever asks more of me than I currently have to give, and I find that out only after I've already promised it to you? Nobody prepares you for that particular fear, future wife. Everyone shows up for the parts of a wedding that are easy to celebrate. The dress, the rings, the song we pick for our first dance. Nobody throws a party for responsibility, because responsibility doesn't photograph well. It doesn't happen in front of a crowd. It happens after the guests have gone home, and the flowers have wilted in the vase on the counter, and the last thank you card has been mailed. That's where the actual marriage begins, in a hallway with no decorations, on an ordinary Wednesday, when nobody's watching and it would be easy to phone it in. That's the part I keep circling back to when I lie awake. Not the wedding day, the 10,000 ordinary days after it. The quiet dinners where we don't have much to say and have to fight the urge to reach for our phones instead of each other. The arguments about something small, like whose turn it was to call the plumber, that are really about something much bigger underneath. The stretch of months when work is hard for one of us, and the other has to carry more than their share without keeping score. Anyone can love someone during the good years. The real question, the one that keeps me up, is who we become during the hard ones. I don't say any of this because I doubt you, future wife. If I doubted you, I don't think I'd have the courage to say any of this at all. I'd just quietly keep it to myself and hope you never noticed. I'm telling you because the opposite of doubt isn't certainty. I've learned that recently. The opposite of doubt is honesty, and honesty says I don't know exactly what's coming, but I know I don't want to face it with anyone but you. There's something I've never said to you out loud, and I think it's time. The closer I get to you, the more exposed I feel, and not in a way I always know how to explain. Before you, loss was an abstract idea, something that happened to other people, something I understood the way you understand a statistic. Now loss has a face. It has your laugh. It has the particular way you hum when you're cooking and don't realize you're doing it. It has your handwriting on the grocery list stuck to the fridge. Every future I let myself imagine now has you standing in the middle of it, and that means every future I imagine also comes with the quiet possibility of losing it, which is a kind of fear I never had to carry before. I used to think love was supposed to make fear disappear. I don't think that anymore. I think love is what gives fear something worth being afraid of losing. Before you, I had nothing precious enough to be truly afraid for. Now I do, and the fear that comes with that isn't a tell sign that something's wrong with us. I think it's just the tax you pay on loving something real. I'd rather pay that tax for the rest of my life than go back to the emptiness of having nothing worth fearing for. Future wife, if you're still with me, thank you. I know this isn't easy to sit through. I've spent most of my adult life trying to look like I have it figured out, capable, composed, the guy with a plan for everything. Tonight I don't want you to marry that guy. I want you to marry the truth of me instead, and the truth is layered. The truth says I'm genuinely thrilled to spend my life with you. The truth also says I'm afraid of not being enough, of one day disappointing the person whose happiness has become, without my permission, one of the most important things in my life. Maybe that's what real love actually is. Not becoming a person without fear, but becoming a person who decides someone is worth walking straight into the fear anyway. There's still one thing I haven't told you though, and it's the real reason I couldn't sleep last week. It came to me late, past midnight, in that strange hour when your defenses are too tired to keep working, and your mind just tells you the truth whether you asked for it or not. It isn't about commitment, not really. It isn't even about the fear of losing you, as real as that fear is. It's something underneath all of that, something I had been circling for months without letting myself land on it. And once I finally understood what it was, I couldn't fall back asleep, because I realized my nervousness was never really about the wedding at all. It's about the man I become the moment I let someone love me all the way through. That night I lay there in the dark, no phone buzzing, no meeting tomorrow demanding my attention, nothing to distract me from my own thoughts. And I kept asking myself the same question over and over. Why am I actually nervous? I had a list of respectable answers ready. Responsibility, commitment, the fear of hurting you. Every one of those answers sounded mature when I said it out loud. None of them felt true when I sat with them in silence. There was something underneath, something I'd spent years building a life on top of without ever looking directly at it. Future wife, have you noticed that happiness sometimes exposes things that hardship never does? I always assumed my defenses would crack under pressure, under some crisis, some dramatic low point. Instead, they cracked while I was happy, while things were going right, because happiness gave my heart permission to finally be honest with me. You didn't create the fear that's been surfacing, you just made it safe enough to finally show up. There's a real difference there, and it took me a long time to understand it. For years, I mistook control for maturity. I thought staying composed, staying self-sufficient, never asking for too much, was what wisdom looked like. People even admired it. My friends called me steady, my family called me the reliable one. But here's what I didn't understand until recently. Control can be its own kind of hiding place. If nobody gets close enough to really see you, nobody can really hurt you, but nobody can really love you either, not the way you actually want to be loved. I thought I was protecting my heart all those years. I think, honestly, I was protecting my fear of being disappointed, and those are not the same project. You never asked me to become someone else, future wife. That's what makes this so hard to explain to people who haven't lived it. You just loved the version of me that already existed, quiet moods and all, and somehow that made pretending impossible. You notice the parts of me I don't say out loud. You catch the exact evening I go quiet for no obvious reason, and you don't demand an explanation. You just stay close enough that I know I could give one if I wanted to. I don't know how you do that. I only know that it terrifies me and comforts me in almost the same breath. I found an old shoebox of photographs a few weeks ago, from years before we met. Different apartments, different cities, a version of my life that had nothing to do with you in it. I expected to feel nostalgic looking through them. Instead, I felt something closer to relief, and the relief itself scared me. None of those younger versions of me had anything to lose the way I do now. None of them woke up at 2 in the morning worried about someone else's heart. Life back then looked smaller in every photo, but it also looked safer. And for one dangerous second, my mind whispered that it had been easier before you. I closed the box fast, not because the thought was true, but because it sounded so believable that I didn't trust myself to keep looking at it. That's the thing about fear, future wife. It never announces itself. It doesn't come in shouting that something is wrong. It shows up quiet and reasonable, dressed up as wisdom. It tells you that keeping some distance is just being careful. It tells you that not expecting too much protects you from disappointment. Given enough time, fear starts sounding exactly like common sense, and that's precisely what makes it dangerous. I have to confess something uncomfortable. There were quiet moments, moments I'm not proud of, where some small, cowardly part of me wondered if walking away before the wedding would hurt less than risking heartbreak after it. I hate even writing that sentence. It sounds like doubt about you, and it wasn't. It was fear trying to negotiate a better deal with love, and fear never plays fair. Fear wants a guarantee. Love can't offer one. Fear wants certainty. All love has ever offered anybody is trust. Fear wants control. Love asks you to hand it over. I stood between those two voices for longer than I want to admit, and from the outside nobody could tell. My friends saw a man getting his life together. Inside, some nights I felt like I was standing at the edge of something with no idea how far down it went. I used to think courage was supposed to feel powerful, like a switch flipping on. I don't believe that anymore. Real courage, the kind that actually costs you something, feels uncomfortable the entire way through. It feels like walking forward while every old instinct in your body is screaming at you to turn around and go back to what's familiar. People confuse comfort with peace all the time, and they're not the same thing at all. Comfort asks you to stay exactly the same. Peace asks you to become someone new, and becoming someone new is rarely comfortable while it's happening. You brought peace into my life, future wife, but it hasn't come easily, and I don't think it's supposed to. Every day I love you a little more, another old wall quietly comes down. Another excuse I used to lean on quietly stops working. Each time that happens, I feel lighter and more exposed at once, like a coat I've worn my whole life is being taken off me piece by piece in public. What actually surprised me the most in all of this wasn't discovering how deeply I love you. I already knew that. What surprised me was discovering how deeply I still feared being loved back, completely without conditions. Being admired is easy, people admire a highlight reel. Being respected is easy too in its own way. But being loved, actually loved, means someone eventually sees everything. The insecurities you thought you'd hidden well enough. The exhaustion behind the smile. The mistakes you're still quietly ashamed of. The old wounds you assumed nobody would ever notice because you'd gotten so good at covering them. Marriage doesn't just ask two people to build a life together, future wife. It asks two entire histories to meet each other, two childhoods, two sets of old fears, two completely different educations in what love is even supposed to look like. Once I understood that, I stopped only thinking about our future and started thinking hard about my past, about every quiet lesson I absorbed as a kid without realizing it was shaping me, every small disappointment, every goodbye that landed harder than it should have, every moment that, without me noticing, taught me not to expect anything to last. I never understood how deeply those old lessons had settled into me until you arrived and became something like a mirror, showing me less about who you are and more about who I still am underneath everything. Here's the strange part, future wife. You've never once given me a real reason to doubt you. Not one. Every fear I've described in this letter belongs entirely to me, and I need you to understand that clearly, because I don't want you walking away from this thinking you've done something wrong. You've done the opposite. You've loved me with such consistency and such patience that I can no longer hide behind the old versions of myself I used to rely on. That's what actually scares me. Not because honesty is dangerous, but because honesty changes a person, and change is almost always uncomfortable before it becomes something beautiful. The more I sat with all of this, the more one particular question kept surfacing, heavier than the rest. If I spent years convincing myself I needed nobody, why does the idea of losing you now feel unbearable? Why does one single person suddenly matter enough to completely rewrite the future I used to imagine for myself alone? That question followed me for days, then weeks. Every path I followed trying to answer it led me to the same uncomfortable truth. I wasn't afraid of marriage. I wasn't afraid of forever. Not exactly. I was afraid of becoming emotionally dependent on the one person whose absence could tilt my entire world sideways. The moment I finally admitted that to myself, everything inside me went quiet, not because I'd found peace, but because I'd finally found the actual problem. And once you find the real problem, you can't unfind it. That admission dragged an old memory back up with it, one I hadn't visited in years. Not because I'd forgotten it exactly, but because I had gotten remarkably skilled at walking around it. Some memories don't vanish, they just go quiet. They hide underneath your routines and your ambitions and your calendar full of responsibilities, waiting patiently for someone to love you enough to accidentally wake them back up. That's exactly what happened. The closer I came to marrying you, the louder that old memory got, and for a while I couldn't understand why. Then, driving home alone one evening, the answer found me on its own. Marriage wasn't creating new fears in me, it was uncovering the ones that had been there the whole time, and the oldest one of all wasn't a fear that people betray you. It was a fear that, eventually, people leave. I don't know exactly when I first learned that lesson, future wife. Maybe it happened all at once, in some moment I can still point to. More likely it happened slowly, in 100 small moments too ordinary to seem important while they were happening. Someone who promised they'd always be around, and then quietly wasn't. A friendship that faded so gradually you couldn't name the day it ended. A home that changed shape before I was ready for it to. A dream that just quietly died somewhere along the way, instead of ending with any kind of ceremony. Little by little, without meaning to, my heart collected evidence, and the conclusion it kept drawing was that nothing beautiful gets to stay forever. At first, that belief seemed harmless, almost protective. Years later, I realized it had become something closer to an operating system running quietly underneath every relationship I've ever had. I never said the words out loud, not even to myself, but I lived them completely. Every time something good lasted longer than I expected, part of me started bracing for it to end. Every time someone became important to me, another part of me instinctively took a step back, not because I loved them any less, but because I had learned, somewhere along the way, to expect the loss before it ever arrived. Have you ever caught yourself in a genuinely peaceful moment, future wife, and felt some quiet voice ask how long it's going to last? Nothing's wrong, nobody said anything unkind, everything is calm, and still that voice whispers, don't get too comfortable. I carried that whisper for years, and assumed everyone heard the same thing, that everyone loved this cautiously, always half bracing, always keeping one hand near the door. Then you came into my life, and for the first time I actually wanted to put that hand down. I wanted to stop rehearsing goodbyes I hadn't been given any reason to rehearse. Wanting that, and knowing how to actually do it turned out to be two very different things. Sometimes I watch you laugh at nothing in particular, just because you're happy, and in that exact moment I catch my mind doing something I wish it wouldn't. It starts imagining what it would feel like to lose that laugh. Not on purpose, it just happens almost like a reflex I never asked for, as if some old part of my brain believes love is supposed to come with a built-in rehearsal for grief. I hate that about myself. While you're fully present inside a good moment, some part of me is already grieving something that hasn't happened and might never happen. That's not fair to you, And it's not fair to us because fear steals joy from a relationship long before any real loss ever shows up at the door. I don't want fear writing our story. I want to be the one who writes it, with you on purpose, one ordinary day at a time. There was a night a few weeks ago that I still think about often. I let myself imagine us years into the marriage. A home we'd built together, photographs crowding the hallway walls, your favorite blanket permanently draped over the couch, coffee mugs we've owned so long the handles are chipped. It was peaceful in my mind, right up until, without any warning, my imagination simply erased you from it. The house stayed, the furniture stayed, the memories stayed intact, but you were gone from the picture. I don't know exactly why my mind produced that image unprompted. Maybe it was reminding me how much I actually have to lose now. Maybe it was testing whether I could handle even imagining it. Whatever it was, I sat there staring at nothing for close to an hour afterward, because I realized something almost too large to hold. The life I used to picture before I met you doesn't exist anymore, not even as a fallback. Every dream I have now carries your fingerprint somewhere in it. Every goal I set includes your voice reacting to it. Even success looks different to me now, because success without someone to bring it home to has quietly stopped feeling like success at all. I used to believe independence was the highest form of strength a person could reach for. I've changed my mind. I think connection is, because surviving alone doesn't actually take that much courage once you've practiced it long enough. What takes real courage is letting another person matter enough to completely reshape the shape of your future. That's a kind of bravery I never understood until you. And maybe that explains part of my nervousness, because you've quietly become part of my definition of home. Home isn't a location anymore for me. It's wherever your heart feels safe enough to rest, and somewhere along the way, without either of us announcing it, mine started resting right beside yours. That realization should have comforted me instantly, and eventually it did, but at first it frightened me, because I finally understood exactly what marriage was really asking of me. It wasn't asking for a signature on a piece of paper. It wasn't asking me to wear a ring, though I'll wear ours proudly. It was asking me to stop rehearsing goodbye, permanently, and that felt, for a while, almost impossible to promise honestly. For years I believed preparing for loss in advance would make eventual loss hurt less if it ever came. I think I was wrong about that, future wife. Preparing for an ending doesn't actually protect love. It quietly limits it while it's still happening, because if one of your hands is always reaching toward the exit, out of habit, neither of your hands can ever fully close around someone. That truth landed hard when I finally let myself sit with it, because I recognized myself so clearly inside it. How many good moments had I only half experienced because part of me was already bracing for them to end? How many conversations had fear interrupted before they had a chance to become real memories? Too many. Far more than I want to admit out loud, even to you. And I refuse to let our marriage become another casualty of that same old habit. I don't want to spend the next 20 years quietly waiting for something beautiful to end. I want to spend them building something beautiful instead, on purpose together. There's one more confession left in me tonight, one I've never said to anyone, not even to myself in so many words. Sometimes when you tell me you love me, I don't wonder whether you're being honest. I know you are. What I actually wonder in the quiet half second after you say it is whether I deserve it. That's an entirely different question, and it comes from somewhere much older than our relationship. Somewhere I can't always trace back to a single moment. There's a version of me, younger, quieter, still living somewhere underneath everything I've built since, that occasionally asks what happens the day you finally realize I'm not enough. That voice has been with me longer than I can remember, long enough that I've mostly learned to ignore it. But marriage, I'm learning, has a way of dragging every unfinished conversation you've been avoiding straight into the light, whether you're ready or not. There's something else I've never said out loud either, future wife, mostly because I didn't know how to phrase it without it sounding worse than it actually is. Sometimes fear doesn't announce itself as fear. Sometimes it borrows the language of responsibility. Sometimes it dresses itself up as maturity, as thoughtfulness, as looking out for your best interests. And sometimes it just quietly whispers, maybe she deserves someone better than you. That sentence has visited me more times than I'm proud to admit, and never once because you gave me a reason to think it. You never have. That sentence was already living somewhere inside me long before you showed up. You simply loved me steadily enough, for long enough, that I finally heard it clearly for the first time, and once I heard it, I couldn't pretend it wasn't there anymore. People assume insecurity always looks obvious, future wife. They picture someone visibly unsure, someone constantly seeking reassurance, someone who can't hold eye contact. Real insecurity is often much better disguised than that. Sometimes it wears confidence like a well-tailored suit. Sometimes it hides behind ambition, behind a packed schedule, behind an impressive resume. Sometimes it works harder than everyone else in the room precisely so nobody notices the quiet, persistent voice underneath asking whether it will ever actually be enough. That was me for a long time, and honestly some of it still is. I got remarkably good at achieving things, and every accomplishment offered a little temporary relief from that voice, right up until the next mountain appeared and the whole cycle started over. I used to think enough achievement would eventually silence that voice for good. It never did, because the problem was never really outside of me to begin with. It was always inside, waiting, and love has an uncomfortable talent for exposing exactly the problems that success was never built to solve. The first time you looked at me with total, uncomplicated trust, I smiled on the outside and felt something unexpected underneath. Pressure. Not because your trust felt heavy in a bad way, but because I suddenly understood that someone believed in me more than I believed in myself, and that gap terrified me a little. What if I let her down one day, I kept thinking. What if she eventually realizes I'm not the man she thought she was choosing? What if, 20 years from now, she quietly wishes she'd chosen someone else? I know how irrational that sounds written out plainly like this. I know it. But fear has never once asked my permission before walking into a room in my mind and making itself comfortable. There was an ordinary afternoon I still think about, nothing special happening, no celebration, no milestone. You just looked at me and smiled in a way that made everything around us feel slower for a second. Not because I'd done anything impressive, just because I was there. For a moment, I genuinely couldn't understand it. I remember asking myself how someone could love me this easily when I'd spent my whole life quietly believing love had to be earned through performance. That question has stayed with me ever since, because I think that's where a lot of this actually started. Maybe I never fully learned how to receive love. Maybe I only ever learned how to earn approval. And those two things aren't the same at all. Approval depends on what you do. Love depends on the fact that you exist. I understood approval fluently. Love, I'm still learning, one patient day at a time. With you as my teacher, whether you meant to sign up for that role or not. Future wife, sometimes I think about our actual vows, the ones everyone in the room will hear. And then I think about the quieter promises I'm making privately, the ones nobody else needs to witness for them to count. I will stop pretending to be finished growing. I will stop hiding the parts of myself that don't fit the image people expect from me. I will let you see the real man standing beside you, unfinished edges and all. That private promise feels bigger to me than the ceremony itself, honestly, because pretending, I've come to realize, is exhausting in a way that quietly drains a person over years without them noticing. For a long time, I assumed people loved the version of me that always looked unshakable. Then you arrived, and strangely, kept reaching instead for the version that wasn't, the tired one, the uncertain one, the one who doesn't always know what comes next. You never ran from that version of me. You stayed. I still don't fully understand why, but I've stopped needing to understand it in order to be grateful for it. A few nights ago, I imagined something that embarrassed me a little once I noticed what my mind was doing. I pictured us arguing, nothing dramatic, just one of those small disagreements every married couple eventually has over something like money or chores or whose family we're spending a holiday with. But my imagination didn't stop at the argument. It jumped years ahead on its own, straight to distance, to silence, to two people sharing a house while feeling further apart than they'd ever been apart physically, smiling less, talking less, becoming polite strangers under the same roof. That image broke my heart a little, not because I believe it's inevitable for us, but because it revealed something about how my mind works. It's always been quicker to imagine losing happiness than to imagine protecting it. I keep asking myself why fear gets to write such vivid stories so easily while love has to work so much harder to be believed. The best answer I've found is that fear assumes disappointment is inevitable, while love insists that growth is still possible. Those two voices have been arguing inside me for years, and I'm choosing, on purpose every single day, to keep listening to the second one a little louder. Every relationship, eventually, arrives at the point where the initial magic quiets down. The butterflies settle. Life gets ordinary again, bills show up, stress shows up, unexpected seasons arrive uninvited. That's the moment, I think, when people discover whether they fell in love with a feeling or committed to an actual person. I've thought about that turning point more times than I can count, and I keep landing on the same conclusion. I don't want a perfect marriage. I want an honest one. A marriage where we don't perform for each other. A marriage where hard conversations happen while they're still small, before resentment has a chance to grow roots. A marriage where silence is never used as a punishment. A marriage where, even mid-argument, we both still remember we're on the same team. Life is going to challenge us plenty without our help. We don't need to hand it any extra ammunition by treating each other as opponents. There's another reason I wanted to say all of this before the wedding rather than after it, future wife. I don't want you falling in love with a polished version of me that can't survive contact with real life. Illusions always disappoint eventually, because they can't hold up under pressure. Truth doesn't work that way. Truth gives two people an honest chance to choose each other with their eyes fully open. So here's the truth, as plainly as I can put it. I will make mistakes with you. I'll misread you sometimes, especially early on. I'll go quiet on certain days for reasons I can't immediately name, and I'll need patience while I figure out how to explain them. There will be moments when fear speaks louder in my head than wisdom does. But I'm also promising something else, right here, before any officiant asks me to. I will never stop coming back, even after hard conversations, even after seasons that test us, even after we disappoint each other, which we will, because we're both human. I will keep choosing us, not because it's always going to feel easy, but because you will always matter enough to make the choosing worth it. The older I get, the more convinced I become that love isn't actually built in the extraordinary moments people photograph and post about. It's built in small apologies offered before pride has a chance to calcify. It's built in the small sacrifices nobody applauds. It's built in the small conversations before bed where nothing dramatic is said, just presence, offered again and again. It's built in millions of small decisions, repeated so many times they eventually stop feeling like decisions at all and start feeling like who we simply are. That's what forever actually looks like underneath all the ceremony. Not one enormous promise made once. Millions of tiny ones, renewed quietly every single day, mostly when nobody else is watching. There was one particular night that changed something in me for good, future wife, and it wasn't dramatic at all from the outside. No phone call, no devastating news, no unexpected goodbye. The world around me looked exactly like any other ordinary night, but something inside me was quietly rearranging itself. I sat alone after everyone else had gone to sleep. The room dark, the city still faintly alive outside the window, cars passing somewhere below, light flickering across the ceiling every so often. Everything looked the same as it always did. Nothing inside me felt the same anymore, because I had finally reached the point where I couldn't lie to myself about the real question any longer. For months I'd been asking myself the wrong one. Am I ready to marry you? That was never the actual question underneath all my restlessness. I let myself imagine two different versions of my future that night, side by side, as clearly as I could picture them. In the first, I stayed emotionally guarded, careful, never letting myself lean too heavily on anyone. If something ended, I would survive it easily, because I'd never fully invested in the first place. From the outside, that life would probably look strong, disciplined even. Up close, it felt hollow. Plenty of achievement, plenty of stability, but no real surrender anywhere in it. No place where anything in me could actually rest. In the second version, I chose you completely, without any quiet exit strategy tucked away in a back pocket. I let myself need you. I let myself build dreams with your name already written into them. I stopped keeping an emergency exit propped open just in case. That version came with real risk, undeniable risk, because if anything ever happened to you, it would break something in me that might not fully heal. There was no pretending otherwise. And still, somehow, even fully aware of that risk, I wanted the second future more. Not because it was safer, because it was real, and real was worth more to me than safe. Once I actually let myself weigh them honestly side by side, that's when I finally understood something that reorganized how I think about love entirely. The opposite of fear isn't confidence, the way I always assumed growing up. The opposite of fear is surrender. Confidence says I know exactly how this is going to work out. Surrender says I have no idea what tomorrow holds, and I'm choosing love today anyway. I spent years chasing confidence, thinking it would eventually make me brave enough for this. Now I think surrender takes far more courage, because confidence only ever depends on certainty, and certainty is something nobody actually gets to have. Surrender depends on trust instead, and you handed me trust freely long before I had any idea how to hand it back to you. That same night I found myself replaying small moments between us that hadn't seemed important while they were happening. The way you look at me even when I'm not saying anything. The way you notice almost immediately when I go unusually quiet, and how you ask if I'm okay even when I insist that I am. Most people only hear words. Somehow you hear the silence underneath them too, and that still amazes me, because silence has always been where I go to hide from everyone, including myself. Yet somehow you keep finding me there anyway, not to fix me, not to change me, just to sit beside me until I'm ready to talk. Do you understand how rare that actually is? Most people are drawn toward the polished, successful version of a person. Very few people stay close to the uncertain version. You did again and again without keeping score, and I think that's the real reason leaving was never seriously an option for me. Fear suggested it more than once quietly in the background. Love never once agreed. There was one more realization that night that nearly undid me completely. I understood all at once that I had spent years trying to become worthy of a love that you had already been giving me freely the entire time. Can you imagine how exhausting that actually is? Running as hard as you can toward a finish line while the thing you're chasing is already standing right beside you, waiting patiently. I laughed when I realized it. Then a moment later I cried, because I understood how many years I'd wasted believing I needed to become extraordinary before I deserved something as simple and human as ordinary love. What a painful, unnecessary misunderstanding to carry around for so long. Love was never a reward handed out for perfection. It's a place where imperfect people get to grow up together, slowly, side by side. I wish someone had told me that plainly when I was younger. I might not have spent so many years quietly trying to prove I was worth loving. That night I asked myself one final question before I finally fell asleep. If fear vanished completely tomorrow morning, what would I actually do? The answer arrived instantly, without hesitation. I would marry you without another moment's doubt, without one more conversation with my own anxiety, without waiting for some sign to arrive and confirm I was making the right choice. I would simply choose you, plainly, the way people choose the things they already know they can't live without. Then a second question followed close behind the first. If love disappeared tomorrow instead, what exactly would fear still be protecting me from? The honest answer was nothing, absolutely nothing worth protecting. That's when it all finally came into focus. Fear had spent years convincing me it was safeguarding my future. In reality, it had only ever been delaying it. Future wife, I don't want to walk into our wedding still carrying old survival habits into a brand new life. I don't want to promise you forever while some quiet part of me is still secretly rehearsing an exit. I don't want to hold your hand while another part of me keeps one foot near the door out of old habit. That's not the husband I want to become for you. I want to become the man who stays fully without reservation. The man who listens before he defends himself. The man who apologizes before pride gets loud enough to drown out love. The man who keeps choosing us, especially and specifically on the most ordinary days, when nobody would notice if he didn't, if we grow old together, and I hope with everything in me that we do. I don't want our wedding day to be the memory we hold up as the best one. I want the best memory to be everything that happens after it. The quiet mornings that never make it into any photo album. The difficult seasons we get through without letting go of each other's hands. The nights we choose to stay up talking instead of giving up on a hard conversation halfway through. The laughter that finds its way back after a hard cry. The forgiveness that shows up before resentment gets the chance to settle in and take root. The private life that belongs entirely to us, that nobody else ever gets to fully see or understand, because it was never built for an audience in the first place. There's one last thing I need to say, future wife, and it's simpler than everything that came before it, even though it took me the longest to find. I used to think I was afraid of marrying you. I wasn't. I was afraid of becoming the kind of man who finally let himself be loved completely, without flinching, without preparing an exit, without keeping one hand free just in case. That fear is still here some nights, quieter now, but honest enough that I wanted you to know about it before I stand in front of everyone and promise you forever. Not because I need you to fix it for me. You can't, and I don't expect you to try. This is my work to keep doing, one ordinary day at a time for the rest of our life together. So here is what I actually want to promise you, future wife, once all of this is finally said out loud between us. Not a flawless marriage, a real one. Not a fearless man, a present one. Someone who tells you when something is wrong instead of letting it turn into silence that quietly steals the peace from our home. Someone who chooses you again tomorrow morning, and the morning after that, and every ordinary Tuesday for as long as we both get to keep choosing. Because I've finally understood, after all these pages of thinking out loud, that love was never asking me to stop being afraid. It was only ever asking me to keep showing up anyway honestly, one small unremarkable day at a time, for the rest of the life I get to build with you.